Okay, so now we know kind of what this might look like. So what causes it? Well, like most psychological disorders, there's no single cause of autism. So there are a couple different things, and I'm going to break down most of these causes into biological causes and psychological or environmental causes as well, because we know that everything interacts. So as far as biology goes, there is some evidence that genetics play a role. So if you remember back to the developmental lecture, we talked about concordance rate. So quiz yourself, see if you remember what that is. So it's been shown that in identical twins, if one twin has autism spectrum disorder, there is a 76 to 88% chance, so it's pretty high concordance with the other twin also having autism spectrum disorder. So there's definitely something genetic that might play a role. But in addition to genes, also some brain structure. So there are certain abnormalities in the amygdala, for instance. The amygdala processes emotion, hippocampus, and cerebellum, for instance. Connectivity patterns between these areas might favor more of a detailed focus over kind of global processing and being able to take in all information. So a couple different factors that might play a role. And then, of course, environmental factors as well. So parental age has been shown to play a role in this as well. Older parents are more likely to give birth to a child with autism spectrum disorder, although this effect is pretty small. There's also a prenatal exposure to infection or certain medications. So for instance, use of SSRIs, which are used antidepressants, during pregnancy is associated with a higher risk for having a child with autism spectrum disorder. And then lastly, some nutrition as well. Okay, so moving on. Oh, yes, one other tangent that we should go down. Vaccines do not cause autism. So we're going to take a little detour. So maybe this is something you've thought about. Maybe this is something you've believed at one point or another. But this has been, unfortunately, a common debate in society, whether or not we should vaccinate our children because that could lead to autism. So let's break this down a little bit. You don't have to write any of this down, but just for your own knowledge. Here's some evidence. So a gajillion studies have shown that autism is not caused by vaccines. This studies more than 1.25 million people. So think about some of the studies we've talked about before, or typical studies might be anywhere from like 20 to 100 people. This is a lot of people. And they combined results from multiple countries, scientists, and funding sources. So this is like a meta-analysis of everything that's ever been done, showing that vaccines do not have any link to autism at all. So where we get that statement from is from a 1998 study of only 12 children. So just from a visual depiction, here's like the entire population of Dallas, Texas. This is like if we had studied this many people compared to the number of people who started on the moon. So let's just pretend we've only studied 12 people. 3 of them didn't have autism at all. 5 had developmental concerns even before they were vaccinated. And the study was funded by lawyers planning to sue a vaccine manufacturer. So, just getting into some ethics real quick, they definitely have a say. They have a preference for how this research comes out. So if you're funded by lawyers who are against vaccines, then you might be influenced to find a negative effect of vaccines. They also were accused for having serious professional misconduct. The researcher is known for being dishonest and irresponsible, etc. And it was formally retracted. So what that means is the research was literally saying it was pulled out of circulation and saying this study is incorrect and we shouldn't go by it anymore. Yet it's still a thing. Okay, so vaccines do not cause autism. The actual evidence is pretty clear in this way. So that is a myth that should be busted. Jumping back. Treatments wise. So again, I'm going to break this down into the biological kind of therapies. So things we talked about on the previous part of this lecture. And then also some of the psychological therapy approaches as well. So biological, there are some medications that are used to treat autism spectrum. They're known as antipsychotic medications, and they're mainly used to prevent an individual from injuring themselves, less so at actually effectively treating the symptoms that they have. It's still pretty uncommon for medicines to be prescribed specifically for autism spectrum disorder, but at least 35% of children with ASD have at least one prescription medication they use to manage symptoms. But there are also some psychological treatments that are used as well, most specifically applied behavior analysis, ABA. So if you remember back to when we talked about behavior therapies, things that kind of encourage or motivate you using operant conditioning to maybe restrict those kind of behaviors or reward being able to do social interactions, things like that. There have been some so-called cures as well, things like dietary changes, maybe trying to remove heavy metals from your body, different things that are trying to treat autism, but these are kind of the most common ones that you should know.